All right, let's look at the question, which is really good, and it comes up quite often, which is, should we use the latest features or updates in development? Now, I'm going to say right off the bat that if it's related to security, the answer is yes. So if it's something that we're security patching or there's possibly a vulnerability that's been discovered, definitely. So that is a major advantage. The other advantage about using the latest features or development updates, a good example of this is any of the latest features, let's say in T-SQL or in .NET, is that a lot of times those development updates make things more convenient. I can think of numerous T-SQL updates where it's much easier to calculate things. There are, of course, disadvantages, but let's state the advantage. One is a lot of times, sometimes, not all the time, but there can be more security features, or it can be something that's updating security. And then, of course, the other thing as well is that there's definitely going to be more shortcuts available to us. And so that's one of the reasons why we would immediately consider it. Otherwise, we wouldn't immediately take advantage of that. So whether that's patching or whether that's just updates in general, whether that's actual, let's say, the code that's been updated to where we can use some of the newer features. But one of the concerns, of course, is compatibility, right? We have to make sure that whatever update we're doing is compatible with everything. And one of the big parts of compatibility, especially in today's world, is a lot of the tools that we use, right? We may use tools that are not compatible with an update. And for those of you that have ever written any tool, let's say for a language or any tool for any library, you know you have to update your tools if, let's say, the language that's underneath it is changed. So I've written a lot of tools for SQL Server, and I'm going to tell you when SQL Server does updates, sometimes it means that some of the tools have to be adjusted as well. So that's a big one right there. There's going to be a cost to compatibility possibly. Again, the exception may be security. And if there's a security update, it doesn't matter because that's going to take precedent over pretty much everything. I can think of very few exceptions where an environment is not going to prioritize security. It may be that they're in a highly competitive environment and they're not really worried about security because hacking is expected, but that's a very exceptional environment. Another concern, of course, is security, right? So we might want the latest features in anything. However, sometimes the latest features may have security flaws because they haven't really been thoroughly tested. And so that's another concern. So we might want to install like the latest version of SQL Server, but there might be some security concerns. Or we might want to install the latest version of any operating system, but there might be security concerns. I can think of definitely Windows in a couple of situations, especially Windows 10. Windows 10 when it first came out. And I still have concerns about Windows 10. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but I think Windows 7, I mean, from a personal use, is a lot better than Windows 10. But it's one of those things where security is a huge concern. People love to jump to the latest, but a lot of times the latest hasn't been thoroughly tested or vetted. So keep in mind, security can be both ways. It can be an advantage if there's been a security patch. It can be a disadvantage if it's just the latest feature that we want. And the other thing as well is development support. So if we're in development environments, obviously other developers have to be able to support whatever code we've rolled out. I've seen this numerous instances where they'll use the latest code, but nobody else recognizes what's going on. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's definitely a good opportunity to learn. But what I will say is, let's suppose we do use the latest code or we do use the latest feature. We shouldn't expect that other people are going to know what that is. So we probably are going to want to explain that development style, or we want to explain that new code or whatnot. And I can think of one kind of funny story. This is like 6 or 7 years ago, but somebody was using, some of the latest code, and other developers didn't know what it was, and they didn't have a very, positive approach to teaching people how to use it. And so it didn't go over very well. That change was viewed negatively, whereas if the person had approached it with, hey, let's just teach this new style of development with the update to the code. So keep that in mind, because that is something we are working with others sometimes, and that's something that we want to be careful about, using the latest when other people don't know what that is. You might want to just ping people and say, hey, they added this in X, Y, or Z, and just letting you know I'm switching it over to here because I think this would actually save us some time. But I will say one of the things, and regardless of whether you do use the latest or you don't, it is in your best interest, in everybody's best interest, to be able to support multiple development ways, okay? So I call this multiple development support, and that is, like, for instance, anything with, let's just pick on T-SQL, since I'm going to be putting this in the SQL playlist, as well as the security playlist, but definitely the SQL playlist. And that is being able to write anything in T-SQL multiple ways. Right? Yes, you can use the latest, and if you can use the latest, go for it, do it. That's wonderful. But you might be in an environment where you can't. And so if you only know how to use the latest code, then it's one of those things where you might end up in an environment or a situation or with a client that doesn't allow you to. And so it's in your best interest to take any line of code in T-SQL and figure out ways that you can rewrite that in other ways. And so that will help you, and you'll be able to go pretty far in those situations. And so if you're in an environment where it's like, well, we're not going to actually install the latest features, or we're not going to use the latest version of SQL Server or whatever it is, you can write it a different way if you have to. So this would be something that I would recommend regardless of whether you want to use the latest or whether you don't, because there's always going to be pros and cons of each. And there are other pros and cons, by the way. This does not cover the full list, but definitely if you can write things in many different ways, that will be a huge advantage to you.